Many people ask me questions about Stoic philosophy and practice. I've created this series to provide short answers to the most common, recurring, or confusing questions about Stoicism. One common question that arises when it comes to Stoicism is, what are the first steps to becoming Stoic? And so there's a lot to say in response to this excellent question. I think it's excellent in that it gives us a lot of opportunities to explore some things that need to be examined. And it also represents a sort of diligence and wish to improve oneself using something that perhaps one doesn't know that much about. So the answers that I'm going to provide here, some of them are positive. You definitely want to do these sorts of things. Some of them are negative, meaning that I'm saying, you probably want to avoid this because it's actually going to be a distraction, or it's going to be too superficial, or it's going to take you off the path and set you behind in some respects. And I will say right off the bat that what I'm saying here, these are my views about it, and there are some other experts on Stoicism who probably would disagree with at least some of this, and that's perhaps a good starting point. There is no one single Stoic path, and there is no one single thing that you absolutely have to begin with, whether it's a concept or a practice or some sort of arrangement of things like the three disciplines. You can approach Stoicism, think of it as a building that is, vast in its scope, and it has a number of different doors. You're not going to necessarily get everything by going in one door, but you're not going to ruin yourself either by going in this door rather than that door. So all of that said by way of preamble, let's break it down. I would say that there's three main areas that you want to focus on. One of these is understanding what Stoicism is. So that's pretty important. How are you going to become Stoic, whatever that means, unless you actually know what Stoicism stands for and means. So there's no getting around that. Another really vital dimension, I would say, and this holds not just for Stoicism, but for virtue ethics and philosophies as ways of life in general, practice. Practice, practice, practice in the sense of repeating it, and let's say practice in the plural. There are many different Stoic practices, and you're going to want to start doing some of them, but not all of them, as we're going to explain. And then we can also talk about direction, orientation, motivation as being something important as well. And there's a learning process that takes place. So let's talk about understanding first. Now, again, much that could be said about that. I'm going to try to condense this a little bit. To understand what Stoicism is so that you have some idea of what you're shooting at, you probably want to get rid of any sort of preconceived notions that you're bringing to it as baggage. So if you're associating Stoicism with the stiff upper lip and not showing emotion, that's actually wrong when it comes to classic Stoicism, Stoicism as a philosophy. You want to get rid of that. You want to, if you can't get it out of your mind, at least, as we say, put it in brackets, right? You have to be open to learning what Stoicism is. You want to actually, I would say, go to the primary sources. We're fortunate in that we do have some of the writings of the classical Stoics, and they're available in a number of translations. Some of them are more old-fashioned, some of them are more contemporary and more readable. Every one of you who is watching this video, you can in fact read Seneca, you can in fact read Marcus Aurelius, you can in fact read Epictetus. Those are the big three, and you really do want to begin by at least spending some time reading at least a bit of their work. I always suggest beginning with Epictetus's Enchiridion and maybe Marcus Aurelius's Meditations, and then going into the Seneca, and then going back to the Epictetus, and then reading other things as well. But if you just start with those, that can be quite helpful. There's also resources available all over the internet to help you understand these things, free courses, videos, podcasts, all that sort of stuff. And there's nothing wrong with using those sorts of resources, but you do want to spend some time with the original text so that you're getting it from the source. That doesn't mean that you can't read things that are about Stoicism and are presenting it in digested form or perhaps a more popular form for you. But you always have to be careful. It's sort of like relying on somebody else. There's a lot of, let's just call it mediocre and superficial material out there on Stoicism. Some of it actually gets things wrong. And so you're not going to know who's getting things right unless you know who's reliable. And the index for reliability is, of course, accordance with the primary teachings and texts. So there are some, good secondary sources out there, but you got to be a bit careful. So don't place too much reliance on that. I would say anything that presents Stoicism as a life hack or, the 10 easy steps for Stoicism, you want to be a bit leery of that sort of stuff. Or they're saying that all these different historical figures are Stoic who aren't really affiliated with Stoicism. Take that with the proverbial grain of salt. I would say that you also want to, if you can, find a community to join in. There can be virtual communities like the various Facebook groups that are out there. And, some of the people in those groups are going to be at different levels of expertise, but you can find some decent stuff in there. You got to be careful about the sort of superficial life hack Stoicism, but you can find some really good resources as well. There are local Stoic communities that you can join in, and you can, bounce ideas off of other people, ask questions. Many of them are available virtually due to COVID-19. And there's other things you can do. You can find somebody who's more experienced to be kind of a coach or a guide for those sorts of things. You can take online classes. There are a number of them available. So all of that will help you with understanding what Stoicism is. And then you can decide whether you really want to be a Stoic or not. Second thing, practice. Practice is extraordinarily important because this is not a theoretical philosophy just by itself. Practice is integral to Stoicism, and practice and theory have to be integrated within Stoicism, and that's part of how you actually learn. There are a lot of Stoic practices out there. I would suggest starting with one or two, not trying to, as we say, boil the ocean. Just pick one or two to actually play around with on a daily basis. You might pick out a particular time of day to work on, say, negative visualization, or you might think about how you apply them in actual situations. So when we do the practice of taking a pause and examining impressions that are coming in, or any of the other Stoic practices, there's the working on them like rehearsal, and then there's the trying to actually pull it off and do it in real life situations. And we could find something kind of in between as well. We could do role playing or stuff like that. But you should experiment with these practices because Stoicism is a practical philosophy. And so, why begin with one or two? Because you want to get good at it, right? If you're trying to learn an instrument, you don't try to do every single drill and master every single technique all at once. You go along kind of plodding bit by bit by bit by bit. And by the way, this is great advice for any spiritual path, any intentional way of living, any philosophy of life. You're going to see that sort of advice being given. The other thing that's important with practice as you're starting out, get yourself into the habit of paying attention to what you succeed in and what you fail in, and why. Did you succeed in it because you actually got it completely right, or were you just lucky in this situation and you need to work on it a bit more? Did you fail because you didn't follow through all the way? Did you fail because some emotions arose and you allowed those to dominate instead of rationality? Did you fail because you became distracted? Did you fail because you actually had the wrong idea of what you were getting into? These are all important considerations. The other things that I'll say about beginning as a Stoic, the biggest mistake that I've seen in years of talking with people who are starting out is expecting that because you have now committed to this thing that you call Stoicism and you know something about, everybody else is to be assessed on that basis. And that is a real danger. You don't want to be assuming that just because you've had these great insights that everybody else is having them and that they should be measured in their thoughts and actions and words and whatever else by those things. Because if you do that, you're actually setting yourself up for a lot of grief and heartache and misunderstandings. Epictetus actually tells you that when you start out, don't tell anybody that you're a Stoic. Don't tell anybody that you're doing philosophy. Just practice it. Keep working on it. And then after a while, if people ask you, hey, why do you seem not to lose your temper so badly? You can tell them, right? I've been practicing Stoicism and it's been helping out. I would say even further, don't try to evangelize, meaning don't spread the good news of Stoicism until you've got a solid basis with it. People get very excited and then they start telling everybody else how they ought to behave, which is really not a Stoic way. Instead, focus on yourself. Develop your own resources. Turn your attention to what Epictetus calls your faculty of choice, or proairesis, your ruling faculty. Work on improving that. Start using the things that you're learning in the understanding side to practice Stoicism, which then is going to have a sort of feedback and teach you more about those ideas. You want to develop something that we call attentiveness. The ancient Greek word for that is prosoche. We're paying attention, not in a morbid or obsessive way, but in a way that's going to be helpful for us to what our thoughts are, to what our reactions are, to what we do, and whether it aligns with the values that we're supposedly taking on. The other things that I'll say, and here I'm going to cut it very short, realize that Stoicism is not a set of simple, disconnected ideas. It is a systematic and complex philosophy. That is why people have found it so powerful and why it has been around for millennia. It was not developed as just a bunch of things that can be plugged in as components and done at sort of in any sort of way willy-nilly. No, it's done in a more and more systematic way. If you aren't doing it that way at the start, that's okay. You don't have to. But as your practice gets better and better and your understanding improves, you're going to want to do that. Stoicism is experimental and experiential. And so you want to be thoughtful about the things that you're doing. If they didn't work, maybe be thoughtful about why they didn't work. They've worked for so many other people in the past. Why didn't they work for you? Well, that's where we engage in some mindfulness and some analysis, and we use the things that we understand to try to change our practice. The very last thing that I'll say is once you decide, I want to be a Stoic, it's going to be something where you make a resolution and you're going to fail in that resolution, and you pick yourself up and get back on the proverbial horse. And that is not just okay, that is the normal way things work. Nobody becomes a Stoic overnight. As a matter of fact, many of us would not, even say, I'm a Stoic in the sense of being a fully finished Stoic. We would say, I'm somebody who's making progress. A proficientes in Latin, or a prokopton in Greek. And that's the way that many classic Stoics describe themselves, as you're going to find when you start reading them. So hopefully that is helpful for people who are asking that very same question.